The morning air lay heavy over Los Angeles as mourners gathered in muted black at the cemetery where Luna's casket lay beneath a simple white canopy, her name etched in polished marble. A hush settled over the crowd, Steffy's quivering sobs, Ridge's stoic jaw clenched in grief, Finn's pale face bathed in tears, while silent guardians flanked the graveside, eyes wary for any sign of the scandals that had consumed their lives. When the minister's voice trailed off and the first handfuls of earth fell, Sheila Carter stepped forward, her posture rigid with defiance rather than sorrow, and spoke up on Bill's behalf, her voice low but carrying across the assembled. She painted Bill not as a criminal, but as a desperate father driven by love, insisting that his reckless abduction of Liam had sprung from the same fierce instinct to protect that now had doomed Luna. Murmurs rippled through those assembled. Some faced her with shock, others with relief at finding an ally against Lee's growing shadow over their family, and Sheila's carefully crafted defense sent fracturing ripples through the fragile unity of the Forrester-Finnegan clan. As the mourners dispersed, Bill hovered at the edge of the gravesite, hollowness in his eyes where resolve had once burned, clutching a folded program with Luna's smiling face and wondering whether Sheila's public vindication would ever erase the guilt that gnawed at him from within. Moments later, beyond the wrought iron gates, Lee watched from a sleek black SUV, her fingers tapping the leather steering wheel in staccato rhythm as Finn approached, head bowed beneath the weight of loss. "You have to believe me," she urged, voice taut as violin strings, eyes gleaming with the fervor of a preacher in a dark pulpit. "I did everything for you. I only wanted what was best for my son." Finn's gaze flickered up, red-rimmed and uncertain, as the wind whipped through his hair and carried away the last echoes of Luna's laughter. He swallowed hard, torn between the woman who had birthed him and the truth that Luna had died entwined in his darkest secrets. For Luna's funeral had not only been a ceremony of farewell, but a crucible that revealed Lee's manipulation in stark relief, her lies and half-truths, the clandestine sessions where Luna had been taught to wield a weapon, the confession recorded on Luna's trembling lips. Finn had stood in that chapel pew, heart shattered, listening to Lee's tearful denials, and as the earth closed over Luna's casket, he understood that his inheritance was built on fear and deceit. Yet even as Lee's despairing plea echoed in his ears, Finn felt the iron bands of loyalty tighten around his chest. Could he cast aside the woman who had raised him, who had nursed him through childhood fevers and comforting whispers at midnight, even now as her hands were stained with orchestrating Luna's downfall? The question gnawed at him like a vulture on carrion, and in that moment Finn realized he must act alone to piece together the fragments of Luna's last days, to sift through Lee's obfuscations and find the heart of her culpability. Haunted by Luna's final cries and the sight of her pale face in the ICU, Finn retreated to his apartment late that night, the city's glow painting his walls in uneasy orange. He spread Moonfang's call logs, appointment records from Lee's private clinic, and a dozen files he had smuggled from the courthouse onto his desk, scanning each line for inconsistencies. The ache of loss fueled his determination. Every forged signature, every unmarked pill bottle, every shred of evidence that linked Lee to the clandestine training sessions was a beacon in the darkness. He felt the solitude as a blade pressing at his ribs. No Ridge to steady him, no Steffy by his side, only the cold hum of his laptop illuminating the room as he cross-referenced security footage timestamps with Lee's own statements to investigators. Each revelation was a fresh wound. Lee's carefully scripted interview with detectives was laced with half-truths, the signed affidavits from hopeless patients contradicted by Luna's own testimony, and buried deep within the clinic's patient logs Finn discovered a reference to Project Valkyrie, a codename hinting at the training regimen that had turned Luna into a killer in waiting. The name alone sent chills racing down his spine, and he realized this was more than mere coercion. It was a premeditated campaign of psychological warfare. As dawn's first light crept through the blinds, Finn's eyes burned from hours of close scrutiny, but he pressed on, driven to deliver justice for Luna even if it meant severing the last tether to his birth mother. Meanwhile, Steffy Forrester Finnegan, cradling the memory of Luna's gentle smile alongside the grief for the son who would never know his sister, found herself drawn into a different kind of revelation. Only hours after the funeral, she had begun feeling a strange fatigue, a flutter of uncertainty beneath her ribs that refused to be silenced by grief alone. In the dead of night, she slipped away to the powder room, heart pounding with a hope she scarcely permitted herself to acknowledge. When the two slender lines appeared on the test strip, one faint but undeniable, she gasped as laughter and tears tangled in her throat. She was pregnant again, third time, an unexpected gift born of sorrow. The news shattered her grief into shards of cautious joy. In her arms had once lain a daughter lost to darkness. Now, beneath her heart stirred the promise of new life. Yet, even as she placed a hand over her womb, she felt the rumble of Finn's turmoil reverberate through the walls of their shared home. He retreated each day to the solitude of his investigation, and Steffy knew that when he returned from that world of truths and lies, they would need to forge a new unity stronger than ever before. For the child she carried was a beacon of hope in a stormy sea, but only if the man she loved could anchor his soul to her side rather than drifting into the abyss of vengeance. As dawn melted into day, Ridge Forrester found Steffy in the nursery, half-painted walls, pastel mobile overhead. Her gaze fixed on the test in her trembling hand. He wrapped her in his arms, kissing her temple, sharing in her wonder and her fear. She whispered the news, voice thick, and Ridge closed his eyes, offering a vow that their family would heal, that this child would know the warmth of a united home. They spoke little of Luna, of Finn, or of Lee, only of this new heartbeat that pulsed between them, a defiance of grief and a testament to resilience. But Ridge's thoughts drifted to Sheila, parked outside with Bill's SUV idling like a wounded beast, readying another defense for a man who had broken too many hearts. He thought of Finn's lonely vigil in the night, reckoning with the woman who had raised him and the truth that had cost Luna her life. He thought of Lee's face, pale and pleading, and he wondered whether blood could tie a man to a mother whose hands were stained with murder. And in that nursery bathed in morning light, Ridge realized that the battle for his family's soul was far from over, that as Steffy's child grew within her, so too must their determination to unmask the rot at the heart of their world. By evening, Lincoln Boulevard buzzed with whispered rumors. Lee had been seen emerging from his penthouse at dawn, eyes hollow. Finn was spotted at a private investigator's office. Sheila and Bill appeared on a local talk show, their voices measured as they defended Bill's actions, and Steffy's pregnancy announcement, carefully briefed to the press, sent enough shockwaves through their social circles that even Forrester Creations' runway shows felt the tremor. At home, Ridge settled into the den to await Finn's return, tablets of evidence beside him, while Steffy prepared a soothing tea for two. When Finn finally stepped through the door, shoulders tense, eyes haunted, Ridge stood and extended a hand not only in brotherhood, but in forgiveness. Finn collapsed into the embrace, letting years of confusion and sorrow spill in a single breath, and as they stood together, Ridge felt the old rifts mend with the promise of shared purpose. Meanwhile, Steffy joined them, placing a gentle hand on Finn's arm, whispering of the new life on its way, of the chance to build a future that honored Luna's memory rather than being consumed by Lee's legacy. Finn's tears glimmered in the lamplight as he nodded, a fragile smile breaking through the pain, and for a moment the three stood united against the darkness that had sought to destroy them. In the days to come, Finn's investigation would bring to light the full extent of Lee's Project Valkyrie, culminating in unsealed warrants, new witness testimonies, and Lee's eventual arraignment on charges of conspiracy, coercion, and involuntary manslaughter. Sheila's attempt to shield Bill would falter under the weight of Luna's recorded confession and the testimony of former clinic patients, while Steffy's pregnancy became both a symbol of renewal and a reminder of the fragility of happiness in a world riddled with betrayal. And as the Forrester Finnegan family prepared to welcome its newest member, a child whose first breaths would be drawn in a world cleansed of Lee's shadow, they carried with them the lessons of loss and the unbreakable bond that arises when hearts are tested by fire. In that crucible of grief and hope, they discovered that true strength lies not in wielding power over others, but in lifting one another from despair, honoring the memory of Luna by vowing that no darkness, however deep, could ever extinguish the light of family. On a moonlit edge of the world where the Pacific wind lashed against craggy stone, Ridge Forrester stood alone once more at the cliffside, where memory and fear entwined like thorny vines. His heart pounded as he gazed down at the dark swirl of water yawning far below, remembering the night Steffy had teetered on that same precipice, memories of her screaming in his arms, her hair tangled with sea foam, the bitter salt of terror on his lips as he pulled her from death's clutch. Tonight, the echo of that fear returned, sharper than ever, because this time it was not Steffy dangling over the abyss, but Bill Spencer bearing the unconscious weight of his grandson, Liam. Across stony ground so close to the abyss that Ridge could almost taste the vertigo in the humid air. Bill's jacket flapped like a tattered flag in the wind as he stumbled forward, eyes wild with desperation, scanning the horizon for the small helicopter whose rotor blades promised flight over the waves to freedom. Ridge's boots crunched on gravel as he moved faster, lunging forward to grip Bill's shoulder, shouting his name, but Bill spun, arms tight around Liam's limp form, and Ridge felt the old, familiar fury surge through his veins. The same fury that had been tested by lies, betrayals, and heartbreak when Bill's ruthless ambition had once torn his family asunder. Yet when Ridge's fist connected with Bill's back in a desperate attempt to wrest Liam free, time seemed to shatter into 1,000 crystals of panic, and Bill slipped on loose stone, his legs folding beneath him as the abyss beckoned with a hungry roar. For an instant, Ridge saw himself as he had been so many years ago, rocking in shallow surf, frantically scanning foaming waves for a sign of Steffy, haunted by the possibility that he might arrive a heartbeat too late. Now, horror tightened his breath in a vice as Bill toppled backward, arms flailing, Liam's small body sliding toward the jagged lip, the helicopter's searchlight winking like a mocking eye in the distance. Ridge's mind fractured between two truths. The searing resentment that Bill, whose selfishness had nearly destroyed his own blood, should face the same peril that had once nearly claimed the woman he loved, and the primal instinct that cried out to save any man whose life teetered on the brink. Memories of Steffy's tear-streaked face, her voice trembling as she had whispered his name in the surf, battled against the memory of Bill coldly wielding power and shaving away the foundations of Ridge's life. Yet, even as Ridge's muscles tensed, his hand shot out, closing on Bill's wrist in a vice of desperation that seared his flesh with guilt. Below, the waves thrashed and hissed, eager to swallow two lives in one violent sweep. Ridge's other hand shot forward, grazing Liam's tiny shoulder, and for a breathless moment the night held its breath with him. His anger dissolved into raw fear, the cliffs themselves seeming to groan under the weight of ancient gravity. Ridge hauled backward with every ounce of his strength, feeling his arms tremble with the effort to drag Bill and child to stable ground. The world tilted, the wind buffeted him as Bill's jacket tore against rock, but Ridge would not let go. Pain cracked through his knuckles as they scraped the stone, blood mingled with sweat, and through it all he saw Bill's face contorting with the sudden realization that death's chill fingers were on his shoulder. Ridge remembered Steffy's look of utter abandonment when he had first found her, and he could not stand by and let Bill slip away as he had once feared losing the woman he cherished. With a final, gargantuan heave, Ridge yanked them both from the cliff's edge, dragging them back into the uncertain safety of solid earth. Bill collapsed beside him, unconscious, tears tracing muddy trails down his cheeks, and Ridge cradled Liam's small, trembling form against his chest, listening with a racing heart as the boy's chest rose and fell with shallow breaths, alive by Ridge's action just as Steffy had been all those years ago. The distant thrum of helicopter blades drew nearer, unwilling to concede its prey, but Ridge shook his head, rising with Liam held protectively in one arm and rolling Bill onto his side with the other, refusing to surrender either soul to the night. Sirens cut through the wind as police cars screeched onto the coastal road above the cliffs, flooding the dark with red and blue strobing light. Ridge stood, blood caking his palms, and raised his gaze to the horizon where the chopper hovered in a futile search pattern, its pilot forced to retreat by the newly converging authorities. Ridge's chest heaved as the adrenaline faded, leaving behind a raw ache that throbbed like an open wound. He glanced at Bill, unconscious and stripped of bravado, and at Liam nestled safely against his chest, blinking with confusion at the press of Ridge's coat against his face. In that moment, Ridge felt the world shift again under the weight of a question older than the cliffs themselves. Does the man who once shattered a family deserve to die there in the dark, or does the instinct to save him, not for the man he is, but because life itself is sacred, transcend every wound he has inflicted? As the police cuffed Bill with gentle firmness and paramedics clamored to check Liam's pulse, Ridge sank to his knees, burying his face against the boy's warm hair, and as the first of tears stung his eyes, he knew the answer lay in the tremor of his own broken heart. Compassion must be wielded even against those who have betrayed us, for to save a life is to reaffirm our own humanity, and in that act of mercy, the ghosts of past tragedies can finally find their rest.